November fog lay like a heavy cloth over the Colorado highway, turning distance into rumor and shape into threat. From the pines, a sound rose, thin, metallic, not at bark, but a plea rubbed raw against rust. A pup hung tangled in barbed wire, belly fur matted with blood, limbs twitching in exhausted rhythm. Below, a German shepherd mother leapt again and again, claws scarring the tree, eyes amber and wild, breath coming in sharp, tearing gusts. Tires hissed on slick asphalt as a tan military transport shuddered to a stop, exhaust ghosting through gray. 4 Marines spilled onto the shoulder in practiced sequence, boots biting wet gravel, words unnecessary. One looked up, measuring bark and angle. One shrugged out a jacket and spread it like a cradle. One braced the mother's lunging weight. One scanned the fog's shifting curtains, listening for the wrong sound. Sound behaved badly in this weather. Close things felt far, far things too close. The fog carried the crow's complaint and the faint rattle of a loose road sign, but softened the pup's whimper into something small and breakable. The barbed wire was old ranch perimeter, half collapsed and hungry for soft bodies. Rust clung in flaking scales that smelled faintly of iron and rain. The tree's bark, slick with dew, gave grudging purchase under scratched grooves where the mother had climbed and fallen, climbed and fallen. Her muscles were cords pulled near snapping, ribs visible beneath scruffy black and tan fur. The Marine's breath steamed. Wet pine and gun oil mingled in the air. A leader's eyes traced the positions as if drawing them into being. The climber at the trunk, the anchor at the dog, the cradle under the fall. He kept his gaze moving, a metronome against panic.
Sergeant Cole moved first, lean frame coiling toward the trunk with a climber's economy. The bark scraped leather up from his gloves in ragged curls. Damp moss smeared across his knuckles. He tasted metal and pine, felt old scar tissue tug along his forearm with each reach. Below, Corporal Diaz set his stance wide, body a barricade between mother and tree, to hold without breaking trust, to restrain without disrespecting her wild devotion. Private Mason knelt on slick grit, jacket unfurled, arms open, hands trembling in a small, honest tremor. Staff Sergeant Ward stood slightly off, shoulders square, chin low, scanning the fog lanes where clarity collapsed. He marked angles and distances. The pup twitched again, claws scrambling for nothing, a tiny tongue fluttering against air that gave no purchase. The barbs held. The wire sang a faint metallic note, vibrating on the edge of disaster. The fog thickened, a living veil pressing closer. Ward's breathing settled into measured counts, the kind drilled into bones by repetition. Inhale steady, hold, exhale controlled. He mapped exits in his head, ditch line left, culvert right, tree line ahead, while listening for friction that didn't belong. The highway behind them shrank to a wet whisper. Somewhere, a truck downshifted and moved on, oblivious. The mother's eyes gleamed like coals, fixed upward, every muscle stuttering with urgency. Diaz murmured a rhythm under his breath, a prayer with no words, hands firm on wet fur. Cole reached a knot of wire buried in bark. The metal rasped, bit, and drew a line of red from his thumb. Below, Mason adjusted the jacket's sag so it formed a proper bowl. Everything slowed to the tick of a second hand living very loudly in 4 sets of years.
Cole angled his shoulder against the trunk and slid a boot to a notch, body aligned like a tool. The pup's belly pressed the barbs. Blood made small crescents on the silver. Breath fluttered from a mouth that smelled faintly of milk. The mother whined an octave that stiffened spines. Mason swallowed. A copper taste rode up his throat. Ward's head rotated a fraction, fog thinning, then fattening, revealing darker wool within gray. He kept that shadow in the corner of vision, refusing to blink. Diaz felt the mother's heartbeat through his forearms, a drum quickening. Cole eased 2 fingers between wire and fur, creating a pocket of mercy. The metal complained but shifted. The tree groaned. Above Cole's ear, a crow's wing broke air like a blade. The fog stroked the scene with long fingers and withheld the horizon, as if waiting for permission to show it. He could feel the wire's old cruelty, rust grit, cold bite, the stubborn memory of holding. Cole flexed forearm tendon against bark, lifted, and found the point where pressure would free without tearing. Blood ran along his wrist, found the raven tattoo on his shoulder through fabric as a phantom sting. Below, Mason steadied his breath and spread knees for balance, jacket edges held wide and low, a cradle meant to catch the world. Diaz absorbed the mother's lunge like a tide against rock, giving a fraction then reclaiming it, whispering rhythm back into her bones. Ward tracked the periphery, recalculating lanes of approach. The fog gathered itself again and parted just enough to make space for doubt. In that small clarity, a line appeared, not tree nor signpost. The shape had height and stillness, and the glint of something indifferent to please.
A human outline separated from the pines, weight balanced in a way Ward recognized from a lifetime of recognizing. The coat hung long, the posture a slouch held together by tension. A firearm angled low in one hand, business end dark as a tunnel. No footsteps, only the faint tick of metal against a belt somewhere under the cloth. Ward didn't speak, no orders traveled, only eyes finding eyes in quick relay. Cole froze halfway through a lift, muscles burning. Mason's breath hitched, then steadied because the jacket must not tremble. Diaz shifted a half step, putting his shoulder between mother and gun, a wall that could move fast in one direction only. The fog pressed close to the stranger and then slid away like shy water. Bark crackled under Cole's boot. The pup's cry thinned to a thread. A decision arrowed down through silence. The stranger's silhouette dipped, then rose, as if testing the air for what courage tasted like today. Ward recalculated. Distance 12 meters, tree to right, culvert to left, Mason exposed, Diaz occupied, Cole mid-climb and unable to draw. Options counted themselves and came up short. The firearm's muzzle lifted a degree, then two, an elevator of intent rising through fog. Ward's pulse shifted from beat to metronome. He leaned weight slightly forward. His voice lived behind his teeth but did not cross them. Cole's fingers found another thread of wire, worked it, opened a slit of space where fur could breathe. The pup's leg spasmed. Rust flaked down like brown snow. Mason angled the jacket to match trajectory if gravity took over. Diaz's forearm flexed like a bridge under load. The mother growled, low and electric, a generator warming to purpose.
The fog absorbed sound and returned it with edits. From the shadow came a whistle, 2 notes, sharp, precise, cutting through like a filament. The mother froze at the first pitch, instinct snagged by that trained slice of tone. Ward cataloged the detail automatically, not random, conditioned control. The muzzle rose another inch, then steadied on the mother's rib cage where fur thinned. Cole's stomach dropped and then braced. He anchored boot and shoulder, wedged fingers deeper, building a tunnel between barbs and flesh with the intimacy of a surgeon working blind. The wire hissed against skin, the pup's mouth opened in a silent scrape of breath. Mason adjusted half an inch left, knees screaming. Diaz spoke a single syllable of prayer and laid it like a warm stone in the cold air. The whistle ceased. The stranger's head tilted, listening to their silence, listening back. Cole's grip faltered for the first time, sweat making negotiation with bark treacherous. The tree gave a mean shudder, shedding a strip of lichen onto his collar. His forearm thrummed with pins and needles, fingertips blazed. He imagined the wire as a hinge, not a snare, and tried to think like metal. Below, Mason kept the jacket as still as pond ice. A ladybug crawled across a cuff, absurd and vivid. Diaz lowered his center of gravity and let the mother's strength break against him in waves, refusing the impulse to overpower, choosing instead to hold the shape of her fear until she could breathe inside it. Ward parsed triangles and lines, angles favoring and failing them. The firearm twitched, then settled,
Fogg braided with exhaust from their truck in lazy spirals. The pup's claws flexed weakly and left 4 soft scratches in air.
There was a sound like a sigh from the wire when it finally seeded a notch. Cole slid 2 knuckles under the pup's belly, lifting enough to unhook 1 fur-tangled barb, then 2. The metal resisted the way old arguments do, with the weight of history. He felt the tiny body's heat against his fingers, the twitch of a heartbeat that wanted better odds. Below, Mason recalibrated the jacket's mouth like a catcher adjusting a glove in the last blink before impact. Diaz leaned his forehead briefly to the mother's ear, sharing warmth. Ward's feet stepped a careful inch to the right, taking a line that placed his shoulder between gun and Mason without shouting the choice. The stranger's eyes, green under shadow, flickered. Fog crawled across his boots. The whistle came again, jagged now, and the mother's ears twitched, torn between command and child. The stranger's voice finally arrived, delivered like a damaged package. Hoarse, grief-laced, clipped by old training. It came without volume and yet carried, not worth saving, don't deserve the world that hurt them, better to end misery clean. Words that wanted to be conviction but trembled like glass. Ward recognized the cadence before the content, ranks drilled into bones, orders grafted onto shame. He didn't answer. He let the voice fall into fog and listened to how it broke. Cole tightened the pocket of space, slid the pup a finger width toward gravity's mercy. Blood smeared across his palm, warm, insisting. The barbs kissed skin one last time and then relinquished. The pup's weight shifted fully into his hands before he could let go. The mother surged upward, a lightning strike contained by Diaz's arms. Mason whispered breath down into the jacket's open mouth.
The muzzle lifted decisively, the kind of lift that ends seconds. Ward's jaw locked, not in fear but in the discipline of not moving where instinct hurled him. He watched the stranger's eyes rather than the barrel. Eyes tell the story of when. They were bloodshot green, brittle and hungry. They widened with the need to do something that would prove a point to the whole indifferent world. The fog thinned enough to show the gouged lines of insignia on his forearm, tattoos slashed through with knife cuts. Cole set the pup on the lip of decision, stay a heartbeat longer to guide descent, or let fall into Mason's waiting cradle and meet a bullet's timing with faith. The mother whined a note that didn't fit inside her throat. Mason's arms quivered but didn't collapse. Diaz exhaled a prayer he didn't know he knew. Cole chose the fraction between heartbeats where fate is negotiable. He nudged the pup outward, easing gravity into partnership instead of surrender. The body dropped, legs loose, breath a surprised hitch. Mason's jacket rose slightly to cushion the arc, a fabric bowl meeting air's betrayal with softness. The mother's paws tore at ground, a scrabble translated into a leap Diaz barely blocked, his boots cutting trenches in mud. The stranger's finger took up slack on the trigger, intention settling into bone. Ward saw it all at once as geometry, drop line, muzzle line, Diaz's hinge, Mason's catch, Cole's release, and the fog itself closing curtains around consequences. The wire quivered, empty of prey. Blood ticked from the punctures in slow beads, sound tiny and enormous. The world inhaled. The crow overhead closed its black scissors of wing and reopened them like punctuation.
Gunfire ripped the fog in a straight sentence. The shot's crack grew a second tail as it bounced from tree to asphalt and back. Ward's hand snapped to Mason's shoulder and yanked him sideways even as the jacket rose. The bullet burned the space where breath had been, tore a silver whisper through fog and kissed bark with a flat, ugly thunk. Cole dropped from his notch, boots skidding down the trunk, body taking impact in knees and thigh, teeth clicking together. Diaz pivoted his whole mass to shield dog and pup with the frame of a door slammed shut. The mother planted over the jacket, head low, lips peeled back in a snarl that meant there was still something in the world worth covering with her body. The pup hit fabric, bounced, rolled into a cup of hands, and found the air awaiting. Ward moved first, not toward the gun, but across its path to draw it. He took a line that forced the muzzle to make a decision. The stranger's stance adjusted in small, trained clicks, shoulders square, feet apart, weight forward.
His face was wrong with lack of sleep, gaunt and electric, a fever-wearing skin. Fog limned his coat and damp light. Behind Ward, Mason crouched over the puppy like someone keeping a flame alive. Cole hit the ground running, boots chewing mud, eyes already calculating where to meet the body, how to break the line without breaking the man. Diaz lowered until his back was a wall. Mother pressed to him, his palms telling her this shape meant safety. The highway sent the distant promise of sirens through the fog, first imagined, then faintly real. The sound did nothing to the stranger's hands.
Words came from the stranger in a broken cadence, more memory than speech. They trained me to protect. They sent me home with ghosts. The world feeds cruelty and calls it circulation. The muzzle shivered with each syllable, then steadied as if conviction required threat to stand upright. Ward listened past the words to the wound behind them. He recognized the scrape of a voice that had lived inside an empty bottle, the tremor riding a nervous system starved and overstimulated at once. Cole closed the last meter in a glide disguised as a stumble, posture slouched to look smaller, eyes soft to suggest mercy, hands curled to become tools in the instant they must. Mason felt the puppy's ribs shift under his fingers, a hummingbird flutter that became steadier breaths. Diaz's prayer switched from asking to promising. The fog pressed its face against everyone's skin. Protocol lived in Ward's spine like a tight wire. Don't engage civilian threats without cause. Don't escalate. Secure scene. Call it in. Wait for units. Mercy lived there too, a heavier thing that bent rules into shapes that let small lives pass. He weighed both without words and found the second heavier. The sirens gained a notch of volume, still far enough to be fiction if anyone chose. The stranger's gaze moved from Ward to the mother to the pup, and something uglier than anger passed through it, a kind of verdict born from his own hurt. Cole watched for the click of decision in the man's shoulders, the micro-shift that would telegraph a second shot's birth. Mason shifted the jacket to cover the pup's flank while leaving a gap for breath. Diaz planted his heel deeper. The moment lengthened until time creaked.
It was the mother who broke the geometry. She surged under Diaz's hands in a twist he hadn't met before, a low, violent torque cut from desperation's muscle. She found a gap and lunged forward 3 strides, placing her body entirely over the pup, as if inventing a new breed of armor. Ward's hands rose slightly, empty, palms forward. The gesture not surrender, but invitation to choose a different world. The stranger's mouth clenched, his eyes liquefied into something unfastened. Cole dropped his center and accelerated, the ground yanking at his boots, mud arguing, momentum deciding. Mason tucked the pup closer against his belly, jacket folding like wings around a small, beating engine. Fog peeled back a fraction, tracing everyone in wet light. The second shot began not at the finger, but at the shoulder, a line Ward read and stepped toward. The shot split into 2 lives, the one it wanted and the one it got. Ward's step redrew the line just enough that bark again caught the consequence meant for flesh. Splinters kissed the fog. The stranger swore without sound, mouth shaping the kind of syllable that cracks at the edges. Cole hit him like a door closing against a storm, shoulder to sternum, both bodies skidding through mud in a smear of coat, camo, and cold earth. The gun fell into a thunk, a stupidly ordinary noise for something that had just argued with life. Diaz reached for metal with a speed that contradicted his mass and swept it with one practiced movement into distance. The mother froze, surprised that the world had changed weight, then sank lower over the pup, muscles stacked in a trembling barricade. Mason breathed into fur like a furnace.
The ground gave them all its chill at once. Cole and the stranger rolled, mud printing their faces with gray masks. The stranger's breath came in ragged bursts that smelled of alcohol and chemicals. His eyes kept trying to lock on to something to justify their rage and failing. Cole's hands became levers, not fists, controlling elbows, redirecting knees, finding the structure of the fight and turning its load-bearing points. Ward waded in when the angle was right, a quiet hand on a wrist to end leverage, a knee placed to remove options without taking breath. No shouting, no ritual dominance, just math applied to muscle. The fog watched without comment. Diaz crouched by Mason, checking the pup's limbs with tender efficiency. The tiny body shivered, yelped once, then quieted, heartbeat flickering into steadier rhythm. The mother's eyes locked on Ward's hands, waiting to judge them. The stranger's coat fell open in the tussle, revealing the story he wore. Insignia ink slashed with knives, old service patches stitched to civilian cloth, a belt whose holes had welcomed the tongue too far. Scars marched across collarbone like failed maps. Ward saw enough to place him without asking. A former brother wearing the trail like a coat turned inside out. The sirens became real then, Dopplered urgency rolling across wet air. The stranger heard them too and sagged at the edges, something brittle snapping inside his posture. Cole eased pressure by degrees, keeping control while granting breath. Mason stroked the pup's head with 2 fingers, a metronome for calm. Diaz loosened his frame over the mother and let her nose find her child. The fog lifted a whisper, then settled, as if unsure whether the scene deserved clarity yet.
The mother's tongue found the pup's face in fast, compulsive sweeps, cleaning blood with a fevered devotion. The pup's eyes fluttered, then tracked, blue-brown irises learning a new light. Mason let the jacket become a nest, edges forming a lip that cradled without trapping. Diaz's hands hovered, ready to become walls if panic required them, but choosing to be air while love did its work. Ward stood above the stranger, weight balanced, breath even, mind stepping between judgment and mercy. He saw the man's pupils flick toward the gun thrown into ditchweeds and then away again, calculation running out of fuel. The sirens found the curve of the highway and grew larger. Fog retreated a little, color returning to the map. Pine greens, mud browns, rust reds. Cole sat back on his heels, forearm bleeding into the cuff, pain finally asking to be acknowledged. Words finally came in a pattern that made sentences. Ward kept them low and unhurried, laying them like boards across a gap. This could be a report and a prison, or it could be a hospital and a chance. There is paperwork heavy as winter, or there is a different ledger where mercy writes in softer ink. The stranger didn't answer with speech. He closed his eyes and opened them again, water gathering on the lower lid without choosing to fall. He stared past Ward's shoulder at the mother, at the small life she covered, and a shudder moved through him like a weather front. Cole wrapped his forearm with the tail of a shirt, the fabric blooming red in slow flowers. Diaz kept one hand on the mother's shoulder, anchoring her to a world that had softened.
The sirens arrived as flashing color at the edge of fog. Red and blue turned into moving seams across gray cloth. Tires crushed wet gravel, doors thumped, radios crackled with clipped syllables. Ward raised a hand and lowered it slowly, making space, shaping the scene so it did not explode in reflex. Local deputies took in uniforms first, then mud, then dog, then gun-shaped absence. Words were exchanged that held back the flood of procedures eager to apply themselves. The stranger's shoulders slumped into the custody of men who didn't know his ghosts, but could at least hold his wrists without contempt. Cole stood and swayed, then steadied, the world narrowing to manageable squares again. Mason handed the pup up to Diaz, who tested weight and found life willing. The mother breathed easier and shook, once, flinging diamonds of water into fog. The unmasking did not require names. It required a glance at an old discharged scar on a file, a muttered mention from a deputy about barbed wire traps reported along this stretch, a quick exchange of eyes among Marines who had seen what happens when training curdles without care. The stranger carried not just a gun, but a pattern. Animals harmed as proof of some bitter theorem about pain. Ward felt anger come like heat and pass through like wind. He would not feed it. He signed a version of events that prioritized living things, a child creature freed, a weapon removed from a bad equation, a man handed to help even if he rejected its arithmetic. The fog climbed back into the pines. The highway hummed alive again. The barbed wire hung empty, still malignant, but now merely metal without a witness strung upon it.
Afterwards carried a different sound. The sirens left behind a hush that wasn't the fog's hush, but a choice to be quiet and listen. The pup slept in jacketed warmth. Breaths, counting and arithmetic, Masson could follow without math. Diaz rocked back on his heels and stretched, spine crackling, prayer completed in the steadying of small lungs. Cole rinsed his forearm at a deputy's suggestion with saline that stung and then soothed, the raven shape under skin burning like a private oath. Ward took in the scene from a step removed, the tree with new scars, the wire with old, the ground printed by boot and knee and paw. The mother at last sank beside the jacket, head on paws, eyes half-lidded but awake enough to spring if the world dared again. Fog thinned to a fine lace, and the mountains hinted at their edges. In the back of the transport, warmth gathered from bodies, breath and the heater's low hiss. The pup received a strip of clean gauze around the small punctures, the crimson seeping reduced to faint roses. Diaz's hands were impossibly gentle, big fingers calibrated to fragile work, while Masson fetched water in a canteen cap and let a drop ride the pup's tongue. Cole leaned against ribbed metal and allowed pain to exist without apology. Ward found ahead, arranging what he would later call logistics and what his men would privately call kindness. A vet at a shelter that understood emergencies, a quiet conversation with deputies to keep names off papers where possible. The mother rode with them, pressed to Diaz's shin, eyes cutting between jacket and door. The road unspooled beneath, slick ribbon finally giving something back instead of taking.
There is a ceremony to survival that needs no altar, a room that smells of antiseptic and wool blankets, the buzz of fluorescent tubes softened by gratitude, the gentle clack of instruments prepared for small bones. The vet moved with the assurance of one who has steadied 1,000 pulse flickers and still treats each as the only one. The Marines stood along the wall like a mismatched honor guard, mud drying into maps on their uniforms. The mother stayed near Mason, nose pressed to his knuckles, accepting his scent as part of the pack now. Cole watched the pup's chest rise, up, down, up, and felt his own lungs mirror it involuntarily. Diaz found a chair too small for him and made himself smaller to fit, a mountain learning gentleness in furniture. Ward signed forms that favored care over incident, choosing a future where paperwork protected mercy. Dawn filtered through clinic blinds as a thinner fog, and with it, a decision rose like steam from warm earth. What began on a shoulder of wet highway became a vow they could speak aloud without the world laughing. Protect what can't call for backup. They named it Paws of Valor because the words fit in the mouth and carried weight in the chest. It would be a practice, not a plaque. Spare hours offered to shelters, transport runs to safe homes, training borrowed to make kindness efficient. The pup, stitched and bandaged, hiccuped a tiny bark that sounded like a coin dropped into a well and finding water. The mother laid her head on Ward's boot, eyes finally soft. Outside, mountains sharpened. The highway gleamed without menace. In their truck, new space existed where fear had been, a cabin warmed by a mission breathing.